Today I would like to review an older Oxford Bible that's no longer in print. And I happen to have two copies of it. The one you see on top is an Oxford self-pronouncing Bible, I believe from 1946. It is in imported leather. That's what it says on the inside of the flap here. And I got it in 1993 at the Don Treader bookstore in Ann Arbor, Michigan, when I was there taking a course in infrared technology. It's pretty beat up. It's in bad shape. You can see it's cracking here along the spine, so this is coming free. The second one that I got more recently off of eBay, and we'll take a look more at that one. It's in Morocco, it says, and I believe it's from 1944. I'll give you some insight later into why I believe that. It's a thin line before thin lines were cool. And here's the box. So it says Oxford Concordance Bible, India paper, self-pronouncing. The style is 677X, and then it has written a 6, a 9T, and it cost $11. What the 6 and the 9T mean, I don't know, and they don't match up with anything I've found inside the book. So as we said, this is supposedly Morocco. Now if my guess as to the date is correct, 1944, it's unlikely, or at least it seems to me unlikely, that we were importing much goat skin. It does seem to be a natural grain. Notice how close the grain is here, and then down here it becomes broader. You can see the different indentations farther apart. So the pattern, the frequency pattern, is lower here and higher here. I mentioned it was edge-lined. It appears to be leather-lined, but this is very, very thin leather. Take a look at the corners. Now, somebody who's actually a leather expert might take a look at this and tell me, nah, this is imitation. This is some kind of rubberized material that they used in World War II for leather. Perhaps that's right. It does seem unlike anything I've seen before, but clearly you can see and feel the tab where it's edge-lined. Now sometimes people talk about how an edge-lined Bible is more durable than a paste-off because you don't get a crack here. Well, in this case at least, what edge-lining has done is it has pulled away the last signatures on either side. Both of these signatures are overcast, and as the book opens, I believe that the cover actually creates tension on the text block and pulls the outer signatures, which are overcast, stitched into this tab somehow, and pulled them off. The same kind of thing happened, but only on the left in my other copy, but it's separated here as well. The other copy doesn't have a text block quite as nice as this. It has somewhat of a stiff text block, so it's kind of hard to turn the text block as a whole. At some point it was exposed to moisture, and so it doesn't want to, it might want to be very flexible, but it's still nicely art gilt. Have art gilt edges on the book, so red over gold. It came originally with a ribbon marker. You can see here a little portion of the ribbon that's left, and the ribbon is in here. We may see it as we flip through. It's a red ribbon, and it is about 8 millimeters wide, or 5/16 of an inch. It has beige headband, tailband, and headband. They may originally have been white, I'm just not sure. We mentioned the binding with smythe sewn. The dimensions are 9 1/8 inches tall, 6 1/4 inches wide, and 1 1/8 inches thick. So that's fairly small and portable, and it's not very light in the, not very heavy in the hand, quite light. To give you a better sense for the size, we will take a look at this and compare it to some other Bibles. We'll start with the Allan Longprimer. Now the Allan Longprimer is essentially the Oxford Longprimer from 1952. So I think this is what Oxford printed as a Longprimer before they went to this text, and we'll compare the text itself later on. So you have a 1940s Oxford Longprimer and then essentially a 1950s Oxford Longprimer here. The Allan is thicker. We'll talk about the paperweight in a minute. The Allan has definitely a heavier paper, so that's probably the major reason it's thicker. Otherwise they're quite similar. The Allan's paper is a bit wider as well. Then in terms of height, they're quite similar there as well. The Allan is a bit taller, but not drastically so. Here is my Concord. And so Concord has a little bit less yap. It again is a thicker Bible, very similar in width. And then let's look at the height of the text blocks. They're very similar there too. Concord is just thicker. It has heavier paper. And here we are with the Cameo. Cameo is thicker as well. Of course, this Cameo has the Apocrypha in it. So it's thicker, but both shorter and not as wide. So mentioned earlier that it says it's Morocco. I'm kind of doubtful because in World War II it seems unlikely to me that we imported very much goat skin from Africa. But it does seem to have a natural grain to it. It has a tooled line which matches the edge of the text block. It has on the spine several pair of such lines, and is stamped with Holy Bible Concordance and Oxford Self-Pronouncing Edition. So let's look inside. Appears to be leather lined. This feels like leather and it has a grain to it. I have an end sheet glued to another piece of cardstock weight paper, to 3 more, and then you get to the title page. So it says, The Oxford Self-Pronouncing Bible. Now, if you're interested in getting one of these, like off eBay or Amazon, this is what you want to look for, but there are a variety of Oxford Self-Pronouncing Bibles. Some have center column references, some don't. Some have this font, some have smaller fonts. So I'll show you in a second what to look for. Title, translated out of the original tongues, appointed to be read in churches, authorized King James Version. This is the Oxford coat of arms, the 3 crowns with the Lord is my light from Psalm 27:1 in Latin on a book in the center of the shield. And then New York Oxford University Press. This is what we want to look for down here. It should say Longprimer, Octavo, refs, and you need to have references in there. This one is pronunciation. If it says Oxford Self-Pronouncing Bible at the top, then it's going to have prawn there in all likelihood. And this one's on India paper. Earlier ones might not be on India paper, and I'm going to show you an example right now. So now you're looking at my computer screen. This is an eBay listing of a vintage 1901 Holy Bible Encyclopedic Concordance Oxford Self-Pronouncing Bible. Now they can't know the date because the date's not in there, but I'll show you how they came up with the 1901. This one's in fair condition, so we'll look at the photos. Let's see if we can click this and get it large. The key here, I wish that thing wouldn't rise up. The key here is to notice here that it says Longprimer down in the lower left, octavo, refs, and pronunciation. This is an older one than the ones I have, so it does not say India paper. It's a thicker paper. It's also different in that it says Sunday School Teachers Edition at the top. So it's going to have material that mine does not have. This particular one is in pretty crappy shape, but you would probably want to get one with a good text block and then get it rebound. But you can see from the form of it that it's a thicker book than the one that I've been showing you. Now here's something else I wanted to show. This is where they get the notion that this book is from 1901. The prefatory note by Henry A. Redpath is dated July 1901. So that's the earliest that this book could possibly have been published. And it's also interesting that they include the date here because of what I will show you in mere moments. So here's the cover page again, the title page, which we just looked at. And there's nothing written on the back, so that's not a very good place to see whether there's show-through or not. It does say printed in the United States of America. You have, after that, you have the epistle dedicatory to King James I of England, James VI of Scotland, who reigned 1603 to 1625 in England. And no epistle to the readers. Have an index of the books of the Bible in their proper order. And then you have a prefatory note by Henry A. Redpath, and look, no date. So what's happened apparently is by the 1940s, Henry A. Redpath is long dead, and they don't want to age the book anymore. They want it to seem new, so they no longer print the fact that Henry Redpath produced the prefatory note in July of 1901. Who was Henry A. Redpath? Well, I happen to have a book here that he wrote. He was a co-author of. He completed the publication of a work by a man named Hatch. People don't buy this anymore, I'm sure, but in an age of computers where you can get all of this in a computer program. But this is the Hatch and Redpath Concordance to the Septuagint. And if we can open it and get into it a little bit, it has here on the left a little bio of Henry Redpath. He died in 1908. He was a minister, that is, he was a Church of England minister. He was a rector of some churches in England, but also worked at Oxford University. He served as Grenfield lecturer on the Septuagint, and he authored several books and articles. You can look him up on Wikipedia. There's a nice article about Henry Redpath there. Okay. So we have a prefatory note from Henry Redpath. I wanted to show the show-through at some point through here. After the prefatory note, we come to the pronunciation symbols, also by Henry Redpath. And then we're at Genesis, and this is a common format for King James Bibles. Now look, you can see some show-through from the other side, but it's actually quite weak. It's well attenuated by this opaque paper. The paper is also quite flat. There's very little sheen to it. So if I turn the camera so that we can demonstrate that a little better. So you don't get much gloss off that at all. I measured the sheet thickness, and I got 27.6 micrometers. So that my estimated paperweight is 25 GSM, and I think that's fairly consistent with calling this India paper. Alright, so what else do we want to do in the overview? Oh, let me show you here the cracking from the inside. So we showed that from the bottom of the book earlier. And what's causing that? I think if you just go over a few pages, you'll find the overcast stitching. So this is my theory anyway. I think this overcasting, which is connecting the front of the book, the front signature to the left, is actually pulling on the signature left and causing it to separate here at the spine. So it's pulling the left signature away from everything in the center. Same thing happens on the right hand end. And we'll flip forward and we'll get to the end of into the Old Testament, which ends at page 930. So we have another title page for the New Testament. Again, the Oxford coat of arms. The Lord is my light. Matthew's Gospel. We'll show some of these other things later on. I just want to point them out here. You have the running dates, and you have the chapter summary, which is not all that uncommon in Oxford Bibles. One very nice thing about this thin, portable, lightweight book is that the words of Christ are in black. I know that will disappoint those of you who like red letter Bibles, but it's a black letter Bible. This particular copy has a little writing in it, so someone has made a little box out beside Matthew 5:3 and put a slash line at the end of it. That's about all I found. It's actually a very clean text block. So we'll go and we'll show you what comes after that, and I think those of you who have the Allan Longprimer will find this very familiar territory, because at the end of the book, after the book of Revelation, which ended on page 1215, one of these days I'm going to figure out what these little annotations here mean. I'm not quite sure what that means. It has to mean something to Oxford. You have a dictionary of scripture proper names. After that, after the dictionary of proper names, there's a subject index. And I have looked at these, and as best I can tell, they are formatted differently and in a different font than the ones in the Longprimer, but they're essentially the same. This is printed in a minion font, so that's a 7-point. Subject index, there's a concordance. Concordance is fairly skimpy. It's a 2-column concordance. And here we are at the break in the back. It's a little hard to see, but there you go, the spine is cracked there. The book is holding together nicely because these signatures that have fallen away are still well connected to the cover. Here's the overcasting, which I think is the culprit, and then you can also see the thread that's holding the text block together. It seems loose in places, but you know, what do you expect from a Bible that's in its 70s? Get to the index of the maps. So this is the Bible Atlas. It shows you how to find which map number and then the grid coordinates for the town or location that you're looking for. So this would be map 2 and then B and 6. So this is B here, and then 6 will be the vertical portion. We're looking at map 1, so there's no 6. Just wanted to show the maps. These are maps by George Philip and Son Limited. The younger George, that is the son, died in 1902. These are London Geographic Society Institute maps. So here's map 2, Egypt, Sinai Peninsula, and Syria. It does have a 6, and B is over here. So whatever town we were looking at is in that grid position. Promised land for the 12 tribes. The Hebrew kingdom under David and Solomon. The kingdoms of Judah and Israel. These are fairly detailed maps. They have a lot of terrain information in them. Waterways are clearly marked. I like maps like these. Sometimes I think we've made steps backwards in our modern technology. Persian and Greek empires. 2 maps on this page. Ptolemaic, Seleucid, the Roman empires, and Palestine under the Maccabees. So that's intertestamental information. Palestine in the time of Christ. Mediterranean lands, Acts and Epistles, so this is Paul's journeys. Roman Empire in the 1st century, time of Tiberius Caesar. And 2 maps here, Galilee and the environs of Jerusalem. And now I'm in a position to show you why I think this is a 1942 edition. So here at the bottom of one of the pages of the stock in the back is the 0677X. We saw in the box that this is style 677X. The T, I don't know what that means, and the 8, I don't know what that means either. The other one has different, my other copy has different letter and number there. It has a 46 though. So my guess is that this one was printed in 42. And my other one, my more beat up copy, is printed in 46. And then there we are at the end of the tour, and we'll come back and look at a page in more detail. So we saw the 12 maps in the last scene. I wanted to make sure that I pointed out that not all the books of the Bible start on their own page. This is rather like the newer Allan Longprimer. They sometimes start in the middle of the page like this. Notice that the page number is at the bottom of the page. When a book starts on a page, they put it here, and the first chapter to begin on that page comes after the book title. Now, if no chapter starts on that page, they just continue the chapter from the previous page. There's a running heading above a line. Continues on the other side. So we see James 2 here, and chapter 2 starts there. And I did point out earlier that you have summaries, chapter summaries here, which is a feature that you frequently find in Oxford Bibles. I don't think Cambridge does that very often. It's clearly in a verse-by-verse format. There are 2 columns of text, and each column is 54 millimeters wide. And my count is that on average, on a tightly packed line, there are about 37 characters per line. I did find one that had 39. There are, on a column like the one here to the right, which continues from the bottom to the top continuously with no breaks, there are 60 lines of text per column. The page dimensions are 210.5 millimeters from the top to the bottom, and 144 millimeters wide, so it's 8.3 inches tall and 5.7 inches wide. Margins are kind of narrow. 12 millimeters here. They are about 8 millimeters at the bottom. It's very narrow. The inner can be as much as 9, less than that here, and the outer is about 10 millimeters. Okay, so we'll take a look at the font, and I'm going to turn us back to Genesis to do that. Look at Times New Roman first. This is Longprimer, so it's supposed to be 10 points. But if you put a 10-point T besides the T and the then there at Genesis 32:7, you see it's actually quite a lot too large. 9.5 is actually too large. It actually is very close. The capital is very close to a 9, perhaps a little bit higher, larger. So it's somewhere between a 9 and a 9.5 point Times New Roman equivalent in the capitals. But the lowercase letters are considerably larger than 9. I would say that they're larger than 9.5. I think the lowercase match fairly well with 10, perhaps somewhere between 9.5 and 10. The font actually seems to be shaped more like a Georgia, and I think a Georgia 9.5 is a fairly good match. Maybe a bit large, but that's not bad. The T's are good. I think 9, the font on the left is a little larger. So it's in that ballpark. It certainly doesn't appear to be a 10-point font at all. If you do the measurement of the column height and divide by the number of lines to get the height per line of text, and divide that by 0.3514, it turns out to be almost exactly 9 points. So I think that's what they used to call a bourgeois, 9 points in the pica system. I think the biggest drawback to this Bible is what you see here. I think these lines are just a little bit too close. They're a fraction of a point too close. You get places where ascenders and descenders almost meet. So look at the F and the K versus the two P's and people. You don't have a feeling of comfort here. The lines are just a little bit too close, which is also true in the more modern Longprimer. There are places as well where the letters are too close together. Tracking is sometimes an issue. Look at messengers. Look how tightly they packed the letters there. Some places they look reasonably relaxed. Look here at we. That's not bad at all, but messengers is quite tight. I think in Genesis I've noticed that said, S-A-I-D, is very closely packed. So it's kind of mixed. Some places it's comfortable, some places it isn't. Tracking generally, I would say, is close. Poor line spacing and close tracking. Unlike the more modern Longprimer, translator-supplied words in this Longprimer are in fact in italics, which is one of the big advantages, that and portability, big advantages of this one. This. So translator-supplied words are clearly indicated by italic type, and that's a very helpful feature that I wish that the Allan Longprimer had retained. We have verse references in the center column where they belong. So let's zoom out a little bit so we don't have a focusing issue. Here we have a date estimate at the top of the column of references, and then the references are in page order, which is the best way to do them. So the A here, which is on the right-hand column, but you don't have to go to the middle or the bottom of the page to find A. It's right here. There is a note here, B, center column reference, right there. There's a text note 2, searched, Hebrew, felt. Then here's a 3, this heap of witnesses, Chaldean. I haven't checked these in particular, but I've checked other translator notes, and they appear to be the same ones that are in my Nelson reproduction of 1611. So I think these are the original notes, unlike the Allan Longprimer, which has its own newer and more modern text notes, which I actually prefer. So these are good features here. Everything's right there where you need it. not like a modern Bible where they're thrown at the bottom of the page, or where the order of the center column references follows first the left column and then the right column. So you're only really good, they're only really convenient at the upper left and the lower right hand of the page. So now we're ready to do some font comparisons. We're in Genesis 4, and I'm going to show the 67-7X, the old Oxford World War II era thin line, against the Cambridge Cameo on the right. The Cameo font is a bit smaller. The lines are more closely spaced, but it's much bolder font on the right than on the left. I guess it's a matter of taste which you would prefer. Would you prefer the slightly larger, more faintly printed font on the left, or the smaller, darker, bolder font on the right? On the left you get the self-pronouncing characters, and you get the chapter summaries. You also get a thinner sort of layout. I wonder, the Concord came out, I think, in the 1920s. I think I've heard that somewhere. And if it did, perhaps that's the reason that drove Oxford to choose a different style for its Longprimer, because the Concord looks more readable. It also is a darker, bolder look on the right than on the left. It lacks many of the pronunciation symbols that the Oxford has, and the Concord does not have any kind of a chapter summary here. It has the cleaner text because it does not have the reference symbols inside the text, like the 4 and the 3 here, this K. You find nothing like that in the Concord. All that there is nothing like that in the Concord. They've decided to make a clean text, so you don't really understand where the references in the center column are mapping to inside the verse that they go with. So this actually gives you better resolution here in the Oxford, but this is clearly a more readable and more pleasant font to the right. Now let's look at the modern Longprimer, which is based on the 1952 Oxford. I've gotten the leather out of the way. So roughly at the same spot. You have thicker paper on the right. You have a larger font, about a point larger, in the Allan Longprimer. You have less self-pronouncing text on the right as well. You do not have the chapter summaries on the right that you have on the left. So the book on the left, the old Oxford Longprimer, self-pronouncing edition from the 1940s, really does have some advantages if you like that kind of thing. If you like a cleaner text, which does not have translator-supplied words in italics, then the modern Oxford is superior. It all comes down to a matter of what you're interested in here. So that pretty much completes my review of this old 1940s Oxford Longprimer. It has prose. Prose are, it's thin, light, and portable. It has the King James Version text with italics, which the more modern Longprimer does not have. It's in a verse-by-verse format, for those of us who like that. It has no red letters in the New Testament, which I think is a real plus. I like the self-pronouncing text. I always have. It's relatively inexpensive. You can find these on eBay for $20 or less in condition something like this if you just watch and keep shopping. I did see one recently listed for $80. The cover was a little better than this one, but the text block had tears and dirt on it, and I couldn't understand why the fellow was asking $80 for it. It was a book that was bought from an estate sale, so perhaps he thought he would sell it to a relative. I wasn't going to pay $80. What you want to do with that, of course, is to, with an old book like this, is to either use it the way it is, so it has to be in relatively decent shape, or to get it rebound. And rebinding it's going to cost you quite a lot of money, so it has to be worthwhile. I mean, would you want to get this one rebound or buy a goatskin new Bible? Self-pronouncing text I like. It's cheap. There are a lot of study helps in the back. These are the same study helps that are in the Allan Longprimer, at least until the C came out, the 53C, which I think has a cyclopedic concordance rather than this concordance. So it's very good material in the back. On the downside, I would say that the major down aspects of this, negative aspects, are the relatively tight line spacing and the fact that the print is not especially bold. But otherwise, I rather like it, particularly for the price. So that concludes my review for this week. I hope it's much shorter than than the recent reviews have been. And I hope you found it useful and enjoyed it. If so, please remember to like, and if you haven't already done so, please subscribe. Thank you very much.